Hi, everybody. Welcome to the KPRC 2 Sports Podcast. This is episode number 8 as we get ready for a big college football weekend. It gets started all over the country. We're focusing now in the next few minutes with a guy. If you follow the Aggies, Texas A&M, you know all about Tex Ags. The owner and editor of TexAgs.com, Billy Liucci, hanging out with us for a few minutes. Billy, thanks for the time, man. It's hard to believe the offseason is done. Camp is over. And it is time to start playing some football on Saturday. I know you're fired up, as is everybody there at TexAgs.
It's here, Randy. It was a long off season. I think, especially in College Station, there was just so much going on around the program with that terrific. Well, first you had a bowl that didn't happen, then you had that terrific recruiting class, unprecedented, historic recruiting class. So there was the build up to that, the signing of that, and the aftermath of that. And then you had the Jimbo Nick Saban feud during the off season, and just wrapped up a highly competitive quarterback battle just a few days ago. So it's been a wild off season. I think I can speak for most Aggies and say that it's about time the season's here. It's go time, and a really tough schedule. Good football team, I think, as well. It should be one of the better ones that I've covered. It certainly is in terms of talent. Mm-hmm. Now it's just a matter of this team proving that maybe 2020 started that transition into that rarefied air, that top 5 status, and the 21 season, that 8-4 year last year, maybe had more to do with an injury at quarterback than it did the rest of it, and that they really are on track to kind of emerge as a top 5 program. This year, I think, will tell the tale either way. They don't necessarily have to get to the mountaintop, but we'll learn a lot.
Do you feel like, how was the offseason coming off that 8-4 season, not where they wanted to be in the SEC? You mentioned the injury. I assume you're talking about the Haynes King injury.
Yeah.
With Haynes King last year, how much of a different story do you think that would have been?
You know, they lost 3. The Arkansas game was 17-10 in the fourth quarter, but I felt like Arkansas controlled that game for most of it. But they lost 3 really close football games. I'm not sure they go 11-1. Maybe they don't beat Alabama. Zach Calzada was brilliant that day. But I think that's a 10-win football team with Haynes King last season, with the team around him, based on how close they were to being that anyway. And I think you look back, it completely changes the narrative, right? Now we're talking about back-to-back New Year's Six bowl games, and this thing's trending a certain way under Jimbo Fisher. And I think that's the reality of where it's at. I just think, again, you saw last year, everybody in the SEC sees it every year. There's such a fine line between winning and losing that when you get right up there on the precipice of it, you've got to kick that, as Bum Phillips famously said, right? Kick that whatever bleepity bleep door in, and that's where the Aggies are at right now. They need to kick it in. They did it 2 years ago. They did it last year for one game. Now's where you back it up and say, hey, these next 3-4 years are going to be a golden age of A&M football, because it's really hard to get to that point. Seen a program like Clemson do it recently. For the blue bloods, it's very hard to get to that point. And when you do, it's a lot easier to fall back into the pack than it is to kick it in. Oregon, I think, would be a good example of that. Texas A&M is on the doorstep of kicking it in. They've got the roster over the next multiple years to have a few runs at it. So this is a pivotal season in College Station.
I want to ask you about a couple things, just some hot talk points with A&M football, and the quarterback race. Walk us through from your perspective. I think a lot of people feel like Haynes King is the guy and has that upside, and they want to see more of him. There's a small fraction that says, they weren't real impressed with him last year. What was your stance on Haynes King with what you saw of him before that injury?
Well, here's where I'll go with that, and I feel like a lot of A&M fans have put too much into that. and a spring game. You know, Haynes King, they saw him play one game. He threw 3 picks, counted for I think 3 touchdowns, had a lot of yards. They saw him play one game in one drive. Oh, by the way, it was his first ever meaningful action in college football. Mm-hmm. You know, as essentially a redshirt freshman, they watched his first start, where probably Jimbo would tell you 2 of the 3 picks weren't on him. He won the job. He won the backup job once. He won the starting job once, and now he's won the starting job a second time. And this time, he beat out a guy that started the last year and a half at LSU, who is really impressive and has been from the minute he got to College Station, and Max Johnson. And he outlasted Connor Wigman, who you're very familiar with, and everybody in Houston listening is very familiar with. I think Wigman has the potential to bring a national title to A&M with the talent that's going to be around him. Connor's a true freshman, however, and he sat at my desk, and we did an interview a couple weeks ago, and he said, the one thing, as soon as he can figure out the why to what he's being asked to do, the why to the checks, the why to the route tree, the why to everything, I think Connor's going to be an absolute force to be reckoned with. But right now, Haynes King is the dude, and I think Jimbo's very comfortable with not only his knowledge of the system, Randy. He wouldn't have won the job if he didn't improve as a passer, which he's absolutely done over last season. Right. But I think the biggest thing, too, Haynes is a legit 4.45 guy at 6'3". That's not common at the quarterback position. And I think last year, Jimbo, there was a lot left on the table there when Haynes went down that they wanted to do with Devon Achane and even Aniyah Smith. In terms of versatility, you talk about a couple of Houston stars there. There was so much versatility there, that he can do with a 4.45 QB and those 2 guys, in the backfield with Aniyah also in the slot and being able to motion over. So much to do there that I feel like that was just tantalizing. I think Jimbo, Randy, last year felt like when Haynes was injured, there was a lot of meat left on that bone for that season. There was a lot that they wanted to do and intended to do last year that they were unable to do without King and his that speed there. That is, again, like I said, it's uncommon at the quarterback position for a guy to be legitimately sub 4.5 and in the mid 4.4s to go with Achane, who might be the fastest player in college football, and a guy like Aniyah Smith. You've got a backup tailback who's a 5-star from the Houston area, and L.J. Johnson. There's so many weapons, but if you have that mobile threat at QB, and I just think that plus the experience was going to make Haynes very difficult to beat out. But that said, what he did was he really improved as a passer, and I think the biggest thing you'll see this year, whether it's Haynes or if something were to happen throughout the year where someone else was quarterbacking, the biggest thing you're going to see is that downfield passing attack open up. And that's what I think's held this offense back. You look at the teams that beat A&M over the last few years, you see like the LSUs of the world, the Alabamas, obviously, the Clemsons. They've got game breakers, game changers on the perimeter. And with Aniyah Smith as a senior, and true freshman Evan Stewart, remember that name. And there's a couple other studs from Houston that are already making noise, and Chris Marshall and Noah Thomas, who are really, you're going to see a lot of them starting this Saturday. But Evan Stewart's as good a true freshman receiver as I've ever seen come through A&M. And I think he is of that category where he'll very quickly be an All-American type of guy. And A&M just simply has not had that at wideout during Fisher's tenure, and now they do. So that should be fascinating.
Is this kind of the year where we're going to start seeing the payoff of some of these recruiting classes? I know it's been a little bit each year, but is this probably, when you look at Fisher's tenure, is this almost I don't know if breakout year is the right term or not, but you know what I'm saying? We're going to see all these great classes that he's put together leading up. We're going to start seeing some of the talent now on the field.
Yeah, and you saw it the last couple of years from that one class in that Houston area, and then
Right.
Nias is still a part of that. But you saw Kenyon Green, who's down in Houston, and Spiller, and some of those guys. But in terms of the top to bottom depth, I think that's when you're about to see it now. I saw a deal the other day that ranked like the most talent on, for every program in college football. And A&M was fourth. It was Bama, Georgia, maybe it was Clemson. I don't know who was third. They had A&M fourth. A&M's got more talent. I don't, whether you're talking 1 to 22 or 1 to 44, 1 to 85, A&M's got more talent than everybody but probably Ohio State, Bama, Georgia.
This small group.
They may have as much talent as Ohio State's.
Yeah.
Ohio State's got it at quarterback and receiver and the skill spots. They're unbelievable. But A&M's got – the Aggies are going to play 12 games this year. They're going to play one team with more talent than them. And so I think if you ask every team on the schedule, everybody but Nick Saban, every head coach, if you gave him truth serum, would say, yeah, I'll trade mine for yours. Here's the difference, though, and this is the wild card. There's a few of them that would say, and I think maybe 4 of A&M's first 6 games. They go Sam Houston Saturday, App State. Maybe the next 4 coaches would say, not Saban, but he's got Bryce Young. But Arkansas, Miami, Mississippi State, they'd all gladly trade talent. Even Sam Pittman would maybe have to admit that, as big and nice
sure
guy
he would.
as he is.
That's right. Yeah.
But they might say, but let me keep my quarterback. I'll take your rest of your team. Let me keep my QB.
Yeah.
Because they don't know Haynes King's an unknown right now. He's a wild card. He's a wild card in the SEC. He's a wild card in the playoff race. So how Haynes plays and directly connected to that is how this O-line plays in September, Randy, I think will tell the tale for this season, because we know what 23 looks like. We know what beyond looks like. I mean, that recruiting class will be in year 2. You'll return a starting quarterback. They'll really return both lines of scrimmage intact. 23 and beyond are going to be the years. But if this is to be the breakout year, and this is to be the year where you kind of shock everyone and make that move and say, okay, we are in the conversation with Ohio State, Georgia, and Bama. They've got to hit the ground running, and King and that offensive line have to be ready to play, not just Saturday and against Appalachian State, but especially ready to roll by week 3 against Miami. Because you go Miami, you go Van Dyke, Jefferson, Rogers, Bryce Young, all in a row. So
you jump right into it.
They're going to have to score. Yeah, no matter how good this defense is, they're going to have to score.
Last question. We're speaking with Billy Liucci from TexAgs.com. Last question for you, Billy. It's still very early, relatively speaking, in Jimbo's tenure, but coming off that year, and this might sound like a silly question, but the pulse down there. Is there pressure on him to – because 8-4 is not acceptable down there for whatever reasons. Yeah. When does the pressure start to show on Jimbo, and what's the leash like, knowing they've got all this talent, and do they need to see, do fans and want to see improvement this fall?
Yeah, I think everybody wants to see improvement this fall, and I think I've talked to Jimbo about that in the past. He understands the pressure that came with him leaving Florida State for A&M, and then the contract extension and the raise and this recruiting class. All of those things ratchet up the pressure, and the contract makes for Jimbo Fisher is going to be at A&M for a while, and everybody at A&M believes in him. And of course, with every year that doesn't go your way, you've covered the sport forever. I have too. That stuff starts to erode. But I think Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher, I think everybody, from the chancellor to the AD to the fans on Texas, I think everybody realizes Texas A&M has their coach. They've got the fit. He fits A&M. He's got the pedigree. He understands what it takes to build a championship program. And like I said earlier, I think everybody that's really watching this thing realizes, hey, it's been a better first 4 years than people want to give credit for. Everybody does the whole people forget A&M's one season removed from where they should have been in the playoff. They won an Orange Bowl. In year 3, Jimbo Fisher produced arguably the best season in Texas A&M history. And what everybody wants to say is, oh, it was a COVID season. I hear the Longhorns. I hear the LSU fans, the rest of it was a COVID season. It's easy for the media to say that, right? Can I tell you a little something about a COVID season? That is the reason Texas A&M did not reach the playoff. Because what nobody wants to say is that if Trevor Lawrence didn't miss the Notre Dame game due to COVID, Notre Dame doesn't beat Clemson in overtime in South Bend. Right. Because we saw what Trevor Lawrence and Clemson did to Notre Dame in the championship. They're not in the playoff discussion. That fourth team is Texas A&M. COVID is what kept A&M out of the playoff that year, not to mention it cost them almost certain home win against Ole Miss that year that would have put them at that extra win there in November, right, to boost their resume, maybe push them past a Notre Dame or an Ohio State. So that season, we're one season removed from a top 5 finish, a number 4 finish in Aggieland. And again, you go back to this will be the year where you see, is A&M really on that top 5 path and kind of have arrived in that realm? And are they a national title contender for the foreseeable future? Or is it a situation where you do ask yourself, well, when is all this recruiting success going to really kick in? And like you said, pay those dividends in the form of SEC championship game berth, a title, a playoff berth. I think it's coming.
Just taking that next step.
Yeah, and this year is an important part of that because it is. And you look at that schedule, man, it's brutal. But as the Longhorns and Sooners are about to find out, and all the Aggies and Bayou Bengals in Houston know, it's a whole different world in the SEC. It really is.
No doubt about it. All starts this weekend with Texas A&M hosting Sam Houston. They'll continue on a matter of weeks. It'll be time for SEC play. Can't wait to watch that. Billy, man, really appreciate the time as always. And if you don't follow TexAgs.com, make sure you give it a follow, subscribe to them. All the great Texas A&M coverage, you can find it at TexAgs.com. Billy is the owner and editor of TexAgs.com. Billy, thanks for hanging with us, and we will see, I'm sure, this fall at Kyle Field.
Thanks, Randy. Always, buddy.